The first thing I learned was that panic makes people loud. When the videos started circulating, everyone talked about the obvious parts: people moving wrong, people not responding, crowds running. But the part that kept repeating in my head wasn't the event affected. It was the noise. Shouting in stairwells. Car horns leaning on for minutes. Doors slamming. A whole city turning into an alarm system that never shut off. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 34. And before all of this, I made my living fixing foundations and crawl spaces around the northern suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. I didn't have a heroic job. I had a practical job. I knew soil. I knew concrete. I knew how water found its way into places it didn't belong. And I knew from years of working under houses that there's a big difference between a place that looks secure and a place that actually is. The outbreak didn't feel real until it started disrupting normal supply chains. In my world, that meant simple things: customers canceling, hardware stores limiting purchases, people paying in cash and asking odd questions about reinforcing rooms. By the time the local news anchors stopped smiling, I'd already done one quiet lap around my own property with a notebook, marking what I could use and what would give me away. I lived in Westerville, in a small ranch house with a detached 2-car garage. Typical neighborhood. Lawns, fences, kids' bikes, mailboxes that all looked the same. My biggest advantage was that I'd never tried to impress anyone with my place. No bright landscaping lights, no big grill on the patio, no loud hobbies. My garage was where I kept my work gear: shovels, pry bars, a compact electric demolition hammer, buckets, a wet-dry vacuum, rolls of heavy plastic, and enough fasteners to build a small bridge if I had to. The first night I took the idea seriously, I stood in the garage with the door closed and the lights off. I listened. The neighborhood sounded normal, but my chest didn't. I kept thinking about how quickly normal can become a trap if everyone knows where you are. A basement is a shelter people expect. A spare bedroom is a shelter people can guess. A pantry with a hidden door is a shelter that becomes a rumor. What I needed was something that didn't look like anything, didn't sound like anything, and didn't show up as a warm rectangle on someone's cheap thermal viewer if those started showing up. I needed a secret room that could pass for empty space, even if someone stood 5 feet from it. I didn't tell anyone the first week. Not because I didn't care about people, but because information spreads faster than infection. I'd seen it in small ways even before the outbreak. A neighbor tells another neighbor that Marcus has tools, and suddenly you're the guy everyone thinks can solve their problem. In a crisis, that kind of attention can become a line of people at your door. I worked in quiet bursts. I planned in the day and moved at night, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because the sound profile is different after midnight. There are fewer lawn mowers, fewer cars, fewer barking dogs. Any unusual noise stands out more, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually useful. If I can hear everything, I can stop the moment something changes. The garage was my cover. It already smelled like concrete dust and old wood. It already had stacked bins and a workbench. If I moved materials, nobody would think twice. A guy with a garage full of tools rearranging his garage is normal. A guy digging up his backyard is not. I started with measurements. A safe hidden space needs 3 things before it needs anything else: structural support, air and water management. Food comes later. Comfort comes later. Everything else is a decoration if you can't breathe and the ceiling comes down. My garage had a slab-on-grade concrete floor, about 4 inches thick with thickened edges at the perimeter. If I tried to dig directly under the slab without a plan, I'd risk undermining it, cracking it, or worse, creating a sink point that someone could notice later. Also, cutting concrete is noisy and dusty. Dust is evidence. So I chose a corner, the northeast corner, where the slab met the wall. If I cut a clean rectangle there, I could later hide the cut line under cabinets, a tool chest, and layered floor mats. And if I was careful, I could keep the cut inside the footprint where the edge thickening helped distribute load. I used painter's tape to mark a rectangle that was 3 feet by 5 feet. Not huge. Just enough to work through, then later to use as an entry hatch. I measured twice. Then I measured again, because mistakes at the start multiply. I already owned a concrete saw, but it was loud. I chose a slower method, a rotary hammer with a chisel bit and patience. The goal wasn't speed, the goal was to look like nothing happened. I set a shop vacuum close to the chisel point and taped plastic sheeting from the ceiling down around the work area like a crude dust tent. Not fancy, just functional. Then I worked in 5-minute bursts, pausing to listen. I wore a proper respirator because concrete dust is not something you bargain with. The air in a closed garage gets thick fast when you make dust, and breathing dust is a long-term mistake you don't get to undo. By 3:10 a.m., I had a clean-cut line and a section of slab that could lift with a pry bar. I didn't lift it yet. I didn't want to reveal the cavity until I had a plan for where the broken chunk would go and how I'd manage the noise of removal. At 7:30 a.m., I went to the grocery store like everyone else and did what a normal person would do. I bought boring food, rice, oats, canned beans, peanut butter, salt, cooking oil, a multivitamin. I didn't buy 10 cases of anything. I didn't want the cashier remembering me. I paid, nodded, and left. On the way back, I stopped at a hardware store and bought things I could justify for home maintenance. A couple of bags of ready-mix concrete, foam board insulation, a box of heavy contractor trash bags, a roll of fiberglass window screen, 2 lengths of 4-inch and 2-inch PVC pipe, a few PVC elbows, a tube of silicone sealant, a door sweep, a couple of cheap furnace filters, a can of expanding foam. The cashier didn't care. That's the thing about the early days. People are still living inside their old routines. The register still beeps. The receipt still prints. Everyone is still pretending they're shopping for a normal weekend. Back in my driveway, my neighbor Erin waved from across the street. Erin Doherty, mid-40s, worked as a nurse at a surgery center. She looked tired even when the world was calm. That day, she looked like she hadn't slept at all. "You okay?" she asked. I gave the most honest, safe answer I had. "I'm managing. You?" "Work is a mess," she said. "They're saying to conserve supplies. That's never a good sign." I nodded like we were discussing the weather. "If you need anything basic, let me know." It sounded like a nice neighbor line, but I meant it with limits. Basic. If you're dehydrated and you need water, that's basic. If you're bleeding and you need clean gauze, that's basic. If you want to know where I'm hiding my food, that's not basic. That afternoon, I did the least exciting thing possible. I read, not novels, manuals, ventilation notes, a few old foundation textbooks I'd kept. I sketched. I calculated volume. If I made a hidden room that was 8 feet long, 6 feet wide, and a bit under 6 feet tall, that's roughly 280 cubic feet. one person needs fresh air continuously. If you're sealed up, carbon dioxide rises and oxygen drops. You don't get a warning that feels dramatic. You just get tired, confused, and then you don't get back up. So I designed the room around airflow and silence. I decided I would build a chamber under the garage, but offset into the yard, like a sideways pocket. The entry would be inside the garage. The room itself would sit partially under the lawn beyond the slab's edge, where I could dig without compromising the slab. That meant tunneling outward after the entry hatch, using careful shoring so I didn't create a collapse risk. I also decided I would not use any engine-driven power. No generator, no fuel smell, no exhaust. A generator is convenient, but it's also a beacon. Sound travels, smell travels. People hear a generator and start doing math about how much you have. I would use a battery bank, and I would keep electrical use low. Small fans, dim lights, radio, and nothing else unless necessary. That night, I lifted the slab section. It came up heavier than it looked. Concrete always does. I slid it onto a sheet of thick plastic, then onto a low furniture dolly I already owned. Then I rolled it into the corner behind a tall steel cabinet. From the garage door, it looked like I'd just moved a cabinet around. Under the slab was compacted gravel and dirt. I set the slab piece on thick foam board so it wouldn't chip. That slab was going back later. The best hiding place is the original hiding place. Then I started digging. Digging is not complicated, but it is physically honest. It tells you exactly what shape you're in. I used a short-handled shovel and a trenching spade. I filled buckets and carried them to the back of the garage. Dirt is evidence, and moving evidence is a logistics problem. I couldn't just pile it outside. The next day, some kid would ask what it was, and the day after that, someone would stand there too long and look at my garage. So I used the oldest trick in construction. I hid it inside trash. Contractor bags can hold a lot, but they also rip if you treat them like miracles. I double-bagged each load, taped to the seams, and stacked the bags inside large plastic storage totes I already had for work supplies. Then I put the lids on and wrote labels like old tile, scrap drywall, and seasonal. Boring labels, normal labels. The kind nobody wants to open. In the first 3 nights, I dug down to about 5 feet, enough to stand hunched and move. I wasn't building a tunnel like in the movies. I was building a crawl-height access that would later widen into a room. For safety, I installed temporary shoring as I went. Pressure-treated 2x4s set vertically, with horizontal braces to keep the walls from sloughing in. The soil in my area is mostly glacial till and clay, which can hold a face for a bit when it's dry, but can slump fast if it gets wet. I treated it like it wanted to collapse, because eventually it would. On the 4th night, the first real sirens started. Not the normal sirens, not one ambulance, multiple, overlapping, and then the sirens stopped. Not because everything got better, but because there was no point in advertising movement anymore. The next day, the local radio station still played music, but the hosts sounded like they were reading off a sheet in a room with someone watching them. Stay calm, shelter in place, avoid unnecessary travel. The same phrases, repeated until they felt like a spell people hoped would work. That afternoon, I got a text from my friend Luis. Luis Ramirez had been a firefighter in Columbus for over a decade. We weren't best friends, but we'd stayed in touch because he'd helped me once when a job went wrong and a homeowner had a medical emergency. He was the kind of guy who stayed steady when other people got shaky. His text was simple. "Do you have a place?" I stared at it longer than I should have. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could tell him I was fine, and that would be true in the smallest sense. I could also tell him I was building something, and that would be true in a bigger sense and would be dangerous. I typed, "Working on it. You?" He responded after a minute. "Station is overrun with people asking for help. Not enough crew. If you can stay quiet, do it." That message settled something in me. When a firefighter tells you to stay quiet, you listen. The real turning point came 3 days later. I was in the garage at 2:05 a.m., kneeling at the edge of the access hole, extending the tunnel outward under the yard. I'd switched to a smaller hand pick and a folding army-style shovel because the space was tighter. I had a headlamp, but it was set to the lowest brightness and aimed down. Then I heard feet. Not inside my house. Outside, on the sidewalk. I froze, holding my breath like I could become part of the floor. The steps slowed near my driveway. 2 voices, low, not shouting. "Check the back," a man said. Another voice answered, "Most of these places are empty. People either left or they're hiding." My stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. I kept still. I listened harder than I've ever listened to anything in my life. Footsteps moved toward my side yard. I heard the soft scrape of someone brushing against a fence, then a brief metallic sound, like a gate latch. I reached up slowly and turned off my headlamp. Total dark. If someone looked through a crack, a pinprick of light would give me away. Even a dim headlamp can bounce off concrete and carry. I had a small security camera system in the house, but I hadn't set it up yet because I didn't want to draw attention with deliveries or obvious exterior cameras. That was a mistake I couldn't fix in the moment. The footsteps got closer to the garage wall. One of them tapped something, maybe a window, maybe the side door. I couldn't see anything, but the sound traveled straight into the hole. A garage is a drum. A hidden hole in a drum is a microphone. I lowered myself into the access and slid the temporary cover over part of the opening. It wasn't the final hatch yet, just plywood with a rubber mat on top. Still, it broke the line of sight and muffled the air movement. Outside, one of them said, "Garage is locked." The other said, "They always lock garages." Then, a pause that felt like an hour. I heard a sniff, like someone testing the air. I had been careful with smells. No cooking in the garage, no chemicals. But humans are animals in one specific way. They trust their nose more than they admit. "Nothing," the first voice said finally. Their steps moved away toward the next house. I stayed still for 5 minutes after the last sound faded. Then I stayed still for 5 more, because people sometimes circle back. Only when my legs started to cramp did I slowly turn my headlamp back on and crawl out. I didn't sleep after that. I worked. That night changed my timeline. My shelter couldn't be a project. It had to be ready. Over the next week, I completed the chamber. The room was not huge. It was roughly 8 feet long and 6 feet wide, with a ceiling height just under 6 feet at the tallest point. I kept it low to reduce the volume of excavation and to keep the roof loads manageable. I framed the walls and ceiling with treated lumber and plywood, then lined the outside with thick plastic sheeting as a vapor barrier. In places where I could, I added foam board insulation to reduce thermal transfer. Not for comfort, for concealment. A hidden room that stays warmer than the soil above it will create a heat signature. A hidden room that stays close to ground temperature blends in. Water management came next. I installed a shallow sump pit in the lowest corner, basically a plastic basin set into the dirt floor with gravel around it. I didn't have an electric sump pump because I didn't want an obvious discharge line or a pump noise. Instead, I designed it as a manual bailout. If water collected, I could scoop it into sealed containers and carry it out in controlled amounts, or pump it by hand through a small hose into the yard during heavy rain when water on the lawn would look normal. The floor was layered, compacted gravel, then a thick plastic layer, then plywood panels on sleepers. It wasn't a perfect waterproof basement. It was a controlled environment with clear failure points I could monitor. Air was the hardest part. I needed intake and exhaust, but I couldn't just run 2 pipes straight up through the yard like a cartoon bunker. Someone would see them, a lawn service would hit them, a neighbor would ask what they were. So I hid them in plain sight. My property had a small plastic shed near the back fence, the kind you buy at a big box store. It held yard tools and looked forgettable. I modified that shed's back corner and ran a 2-inch PVC pipe down through a hole I drilled in the base, then angled it underground toward my chamber. I covered the entry point with gravel and placed a heavy paver on top so it looked like a stabilizing weight for the shed. At the top of the pipe inside the shed, I built a fake vent assembly that looked like normal yard storage clutter. A piece of perforated metal tucked behind a rake and a bag of fertilizer. Behind that, I installed layered screening to keep insects out. Then the cheap furnace filter material, cut to fit. Then, finally, a layer of activated carbon pellets inside a homemade sock-like pouch to reduce odors. Not perfect, but better than nothing. For exhaust, I ran a 4-inch pipe, but I didn't vent it in the yard. I vented it through the garage wall into the existing attic space above the garage, then into a passive roof vent that already existed. Garages often have simple roof ventilation. Mine did. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside the chamber, I installed 2 small, quiet computer-style fans. Not powerful, but steady. One helped draw fresh air through the intake, the other helped push stale air out. I wired them to a simple switch and a small carbon monoxide alarm, and I also included a carbon dioxide monitor I'd bought online during the early days when that was still possible. I didn't trust my feelings to tell me when the air was getting bad. Power came from a battery setup that I built from what I already had and what I could salvage without looking like a person building a fortress. A couple of deep cycle marine batteries I'd used for job site backup, wired in a safe configuration with a fuse and a basic inverter. Enough for fans, a radio, small lights, and charging a phone if the phone ever mattered again. I mounted a small solar panel on the garage roof in a way that looked like a casual homeowner solar charger. Lots of people had those by then. I ran the cable down through the attic and into the garage wall, then into a charge controller mounted behind a cabinet. Nothing screamed underground room. It screamed, guy who likes being prepared for power outages, which in Ohio is normal. The entrance was the final test. A hatch isn't just a door, it's a story. It tells anyone who finds it that something is there. My goal was that nobody would even think to look. I built a frame under the concrete cutout so the slab piece could drop back into the exact same place. I added thin rubber gasket material along the edges to reduce sound and stop air leaks. On top of the slab piece, I laid down interlocking rubber floor mats like you'd see in any garage gym or workshop. Then I rolled a heavy tool chest over the mat seam, not perfectly covering it, just enough to break any straight lines. Humans notice straight lines. They notice patterns. They notice new. If someone walked into my garage, they would see a normal mess, a workbench, a cabinet, a tool chest, some tires, a ladder. It would look like a man who kept meaning to organize and never did. In the chamber, I stored water first. A stack of sealed containers totaling about 30 gallons. Heavy, yes, but it's life. I added a gravity water filter, the kind used for camping, with spare filter elements. I stored food in sealed bins, not because I was worried about rodents underground, but because food smells rise, and rise is how you get noticed. I kept sanitation simple. A bucket toilet with heavy-duty liners, absorbent material, and sealed storage for waste until I could safely dispose of it. Nothing glamorous, just functional. When I finally sat down in that room for the first time with the hatch closed above me, the silence was so complete it felt like pressure on my ears. I listened to my own breathing and thought, this is either the smartest thing I've ever done or the strangest. 2 days later, I got a knock on my front door at 11:48 a.m. I didn't answer immediately. I watched through a narrow gap in my blinds. Erin stood on my porch. She wasn't wearing scrubs, but she looked like she'd come straight from a long shift anyway. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her hands shook slightly when she pressed them together. I opened the door a crack, chain still on. "Marcus," she said, voice low, "I don't have anyone else to ask." That sentence is heavy in a crisis. It's the sentence people say right before they ask you to share your last safety margin. "What's going on?" I asked. She swallowed. "My sister is in town. She came here because she thought suburbs would be calm. She's not doing well. Fever. Confused. I don't know if it's the same thing, but I can't take her to an emergency room right now. They're turning people away. I need a place to keep her separate for a day, maybe 2, while I watch her. A day, maybe 2, separate. Watch." I knew exactly what she was asking without her saying it. She wanted my garage, or my house, or some space where she could isolate someone without drawing attention. And I knew what my answer should be if I was only thinking about myself. But I've never been able to shut off the part of my brain that pictures consequences as real events instead of ideas. If Erin's sister was infected, and I let her into my space, I could lose everything. If Erin's sister was not infected and I refused, I might be refusing someone who could survive with basic care. "Who else knows?" I asked. "No one," Erin said quickly. "I haven't told anyone. I came straight here." I studied her face. Erin was tired, but she wasn't lying. Not about that. I stepped out onto the porch, closed the door behind me, chain still attached. "Erin," I said carefully, "I can't bring anyone inside my house right now. Not because I don't care. Because if I lose this place, I have no backup." Her eyes tightened. "So, that's it?" I raised a hand. "Let me finish. I can help you in another way." I told her I had supplies. A thermometer, basic over-the-counter fever reducers, clean sheets, gloves, disinfectant. I offered her my backyard shed as a temporary isolate space, but I didn't say why it was a good place. I said it like it was just a shed because it had to stay a shed. She hesitated. "A shed?" "It's dry. It's separate from your house and it's out of sight," I said. "I can bring you a space heater if you need it, but I'd rather avoid anything that draws power attention. We can layer insulation, blankets." Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. Okay. I went into my house, grabbed supplies, and walked them to her yard in a covered tote so it looked like normal neighbor borrowing. As I did it, my mind kept scanning for the weak point in my plan. Contact, exposure, a cough in the wrong direction, a shared doorknob. Aaron's sister was named Mallory, late 20s. Worked in marketing, Aaron said, and had never spent a night in a place without good cell service. Mallory sat on a folding chair in the shed with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at me like she was trying to place me, like faces didn't connect right. I kept my distance. I spoke calmly. I watched her breathing, her skin color, her movements. I'd seen enough early footage to know the obvious warning signs, but I also knew that fear makes you see patterns that aren't there. "Hi, Mallory," I said. "I'm Marcus. I'm Aaron's neighbor." Mallory blinked slowly. "Is it safe here?" "As safe as we can make it," I said. "Aaron's going to take care of you. I'm just helping with supplies." Aaron's voice broke slightly when she said, "Drink some water." I left them there with what they needed and went back to my garage, heart thudding like I'd just done something reckless. That night, I sat in my secret room for the first time, not because I needed to hide, but because I needed to think without the world pressing in. The radio in my chamber picked up a weak emergency broadcast. The message repeated every 15 minutes. Shelter in place, avoid contact. Do not approach people who appear disoriented or aggressive. Conserve water. Conserve food. What it didn't say was what I'd learned from the footsteps outside my garage. The threat wasn't only infected. It was people who were already reorganizing themselves into hunters and watchers. The next morning, at 9:20 a.m., Aaron called me. "She's better," Aaron said quickly. "The fever broke. Relief hit me so hard it made me dizzy." "Any other symptoms?" I asked. "Just exhaustion," Aaron said. "I think it was something else. Stress and a regular flu or... I don't know, but she's coherent again." "Good," I said. "Keep her separate for another day if you can, just to be sure." "I will," Aaron said. Then she paused. "Marcus, thank you." After I hung up, I felt the first crack in my absolute isolation plan. Not because I suddenly wanted company, but because helping Aaron had created a thread. Threads become ropes. Ropes become people pulling on you. I spent the next week tightening everything. I made my garage look more cluttered, not less. People think organization means value. Mess means someone who's not worth bothering. I scattered harmless junk in a deliberate way. Empty boxes, old PVC offcuts, a broken chair. It looked like a person mid-project, not a person hiding a clean secret. I also installed a simple doorbell camera on the front door, powered from inside, mounted casually. Lots of people had them. It didn't look like a security upgrade. It looked like normal paranoia. That camera saved me on day 18. At 4:40 p.m., I saw two men walk up to my porch on the monitor. They didn't knock like Aaron. They stood back, scanning, like they were checking for movement. One of them wore a backpack with a radio clipped to the strap. The other wore a baseball cap pulled low. They spoke to each other, but the camera microphone only caught fragments. "This one? Garage. Guy with tools." My throat went dry. Tools. That rumor had already moved. I didn't answer. I didn't move in front of windows. I waited. They lingered, then walked away. But they didn't leave the neighborhood. The camera caught them going house to house, not breaking in, just testing doors and peering through windows like shoppers. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the secret room with the radio low and my ears tuned to every vibration. Around 1:15 a.m., there was a thump on my garage door. Not a gentle tap, a deliberate hit. I killed the chamber lights and listened through the hatch. Another thump, then a scrape, like someone trying to feel for the seam of the side door. Then a voice, quiet and confident. "Marcus, we just want to talk." Hearing my name in the dark did something ugly to my nerves. I didn't respond. The voice continued. "We know you have equipment. We're organizing supplies. We're keeping people safe. Open up and we'll keep it respectful." I stayed silent. They waited. Then, after a minute, the voice hardened. "If you don't open it, people will assume you're hiding something. That makes you a problem." My fingers curled into fists. Not because I wanted a fight, but because my body was looking for something to do with the adrenaline. I kept my mind on the facts. Facts keep you from doing dumb things. Fact 1. The garage door was reinforced at the track points with heavy lag screws. I'd done that years ago after a break-in down the street. Fact 2. The side door had a solid core and a deadbolt. Fact 3. I had no intention of opening anything. The men outside tried the handle once more, then stepped away. I heard them move toward the back corner, where the fence gate was. I'd predicted that. People probe. They look for the weak side. I held my breath as their footsteps went along the fence line. Then I heard a new sound. The plastic shed door opening. My stomach dropped. The shed. My air intake was in there. I moved without thinking, sliding the hatch open from below and climbing up into the garage as silently as a person can move while terrified. I didn't turn on lights. I didn't slam anything. I eased the slab piece up just enough to squeeze through and then lowered it back into place. I crept to the side door and looked through a narrow crack between the door and frame. A flashlight beam swept across my yard. The shed door was open. A man stood half inside it. He rummaged through yard tools, shifting a rake, pushing aside a bag. His beam paused on the corner where my intake assembly sat behind clutter. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. The man leaned in closer. Then, unbelievably, he laughed. "Just junk," he called to his partner. "This guy's a mess." The beam moved away. The shed door closed. They left. Their footsteps retreated down the sidewalk, fading into the distance. I stood there for a full minute in the dark garage, hands shaking. They'd almost found it. Not because my design was bad, but because any hiding place becomes fragile the moment someone starts touching the world around it. After that, I made changes. I moved the intake assembly deeper into the shed, behind a false panel I built from scrap plywood, and painted to match the shed interior. I also added a second decoy vent in a different corner that led nowhere. Just a pipe stub and a screen. If someone found one, it would look like a half-finished yard project. Confusing people is sometimes as valuable as blocking them. I also decided I needed a way to see without being seen. The next day, I climbed into my attic and ran a thin cable down into the garage wall, then out through a tiny hole behind the trim near the garage door. I mounted a pinhole-style camera disguised as a small screwhead in the trim. It wasn't fancy, but it gave me a view of my driveway without putting a visible camera on the exterior. From then on, I lived in 2 layers, the normal house above and the quiet room below. Days became routines. Routines became time. I woke at 6:30 a.m. most mornings. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because daylight is when you can observe without looking suspicious. I would make coffee quietly, drink it by a window that didn't face the street, and watch the neighborhood like it was a nature documentary. By week 4, the neighborhood had changed shape. Some houses were empty. Some had curtains drawn tight. A few had obvious signs of occupation. Smoke from a backyard fire pit, someone hauling water jugs, a person standing watch with their arms crossed like they were guarding a border. One house down the street had been broken into. You could tell by the front door hanging wrong and the shattered glass that nobody bothered to clean up. No police came, no tow trucks, no normal response. At 2:10 p.m. One day, Erin came to my door again. I watched her approach on the doorbell camera and let her in quickly, then locked the door behind her. She looked thinner. Her eyes were sharper. "We have a problem," she said. "Tell me," I said. "There's a group," Erin said. "Not the infected, people. They're going around saying they're coordinating and that everyone has to contribute supplies. They came to my house yesterday. I gave them some canned food because I didn't know what else to do." My jaw tightened. "How many?" "4, she said. 2 men, 1 woman, 1 younger guy. They had radios. They were polite, but it didn't feel polite." I nodded slowly. "They came to me, too." Erin's eyes widened. "What happened?" "I didn't answer," I said. She exhaled hard. "They said if someone doesn't cooperate, they'll come back with more people." That was the predictable arc. Coordination becomes control. Control becomes threats. Erin looked at me like she was about to ask something bigger, something she'd been holding back. I beat her to it. "Do you have somewhere you can go if it gets worse?" She hesitated. "No." I could feel the words rising in my throat. "I have a place. I built a place." I swallowed them back down. "Instead," I said, "if they come back, don't argue. Don't escalate. Give them something small and boring if you have to. Keep your best supplies hidden." Erin stared at me. "Do you have a plan, Marcus?" I looked away for a second. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was calculating. 1 person in my secret room was manageable. 2 was hard. 3 was dangerous. Not because I didn't want to help, but because air and space are math, not emotion. "I have a plan," I said carefully. "But it's not built for visitors." Erin's face shifted. She understood more than I wanted her to. She nodded slowly. "Okay." Then she said something that made my stomach sink again. "Mallory told her friend about you. Not details, just that you're calm and you have supplies." Rumors again, threads again. I kept my voice steady. "Erin, you need to tell Mallory to stop talking about me." Erin winced. "I already did. She's scared." "Everyone is," I said. "But fear turns into words, and words turn into footsteps at 1:15 a.m. Erin looked down, then back up. "What do we do?" For the first time since this started, I made a decision that wasn't just about me. "We build you a fallback," I said. Erin blinked. "How?" "Not underground," I said. "Something simple. Hidden storage. A quiet room in your house that looks boring. Not a fortress. Just a place you can retreat for a few hours if you have to." I spent the next 2 days helping Erin reinforce her closet space behind a built-in shelving unit, using basic carpentry and sound dampening. It wasn't a bunker, it was a hide spot. We added weather stripping to the door, layered blankets behind a false panel to reduce sound, and a small battery-powered fan to keep air moving. We stored water and a small supply kit. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. In exchange, Erin gave me something I hadn't planned for: information. She had access to people who still moved around because of medical work. She heard where the worst clusters were. She heard which roads were blocked. She heard what phrases people were using in the hospitals to describe what they were seeing without saying too much. The ones who are infected, she told me one evening at 8:20 p.m., they're not all the same. What do you mean? I asked. Some are slow, Erin said. Some are restless, like they keep moving even when they should be exhausted, and sound matters. They respond to it fast. I nodded. That fits what I've seen. Erin leaned closer. Marcus, someone told me there are people using drones, like hobby drones. They're flying them over neighborhoods looking for smoke, looking for movement. My throat tightened. That's real? Erin nodded. I didn't see it, but I trust who said it. Drones. That changed the game. A secret room underground is only secret if you don't advertise it. Smoke advertises, heat advertises, movement advertises. That night, I went into the secret room and turned everything down. Fans on low, lights off except a tiny red indicator I could cover with tape if I had to. I sat in the quiet and tried to think like a person hunting for other people. What would I look for? Patterns. Fresh tracks. New piles of dirt, unusual vents, sound at night, light leaks, smell. I'd covered most of that, but I hadn't covered one thing: time. If you spend too much time in one place, someone eventually gets curious. Curiosity is a slow-motion disaster. My solution was uncomfortable but realistic. I made myself boring on purpose. I started leaving my house at predictable times for short, visible tasks, sweeping my driveway, checking my mailbox, bringing a trash bin in and out, even if it was empty. The goal wasn't to look active, it was to look normal. A person who looks normal is less interesting than a person who looks like they're hiding. It worked until it didn't. On day 33, at 6:05 p.m., the group came back. Not 4 this time. 6. I saw them on the driveway camera. 2 women, 4 men, the same radio guy, the same confident voice. They didn't knock. They stood in my driveway like they owned it. I watched from inside, heart steady in a strange way. Fear had burned itself down into something colder. Focus. The confident one stepped forward and spoke toward my door like he was talking to an audience. Marcus, he said, loud enough for neighbors to hear, we're done with secrets. We're making sure everyone contributes. Open the door. I didn't move. He waited 10 seconds, then nodded to the younger guy. The younger guy walked to the garage side door. I felt my jaw clench. Not because I didn't have locks, but because locks are only delays when people have time. The younger guy tried the handle. Locked. He glanced back, shrugging. The confident one sighed dramatically. Okay, he said. We tried. That's the respectful version. Then he did something that made my stomach drop again. He turned and looked directly at Erin's house across the street. Erin, he called, come out here. We need you to confirm something. Cold went through me. He was using her. He was using my connection. I didn't think. I acted. I opened my front door fast enough to show presence, but not fast enough to look desperate. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, keeping my body between them and the inside. The group turned toward me like a single organism. The confident one smiled. There he is. I kept my face neutral. What do you want? We want to coordinate, he said smoothly. "We want everyone safe. That takes resources. You have resources." I looked at the radios, the backpacks, the way their feet were positioned. They were not here to ask. "I have enough for myself," I said. He spread his hands. "No one has enough alone. We're building a network. You join, you contribute, you get protection." I almost laughed at the word protection. Protection from who? From them. "I'm not joining anything," I said. The confident one's smile thinned. "That's a mistake." I kept my voice calm. "If you want a contribution, I can give you a small amount of food and water. That's it. Then you leave." The group members glanced at each other. The confident one weighed the options. He didn't want a scene. He wanted control. "Fine," he said. "Bring out what you can." I didn't go back inside. That would be the moment they rushed the door. Instead, I moved slowly to my porch storage bench, pulled out a bag I'd staged there days earlier for exactly this scenario, and set it on the steps. It contained boring food, a few cans, some rice, a small bottle of water purification tablets. Enough to satisfy them in the moment without harming me. They inspected it like they were appraising a used car. "This all?" the confident one asked. "That's what I'm willing to give," I said. He leaned closer, voice low. "You're a contractor. You have equipment, tools, batteries, radios." I met his eyes. "I have what you see." He stared at me for a long second, then nodded once, like a decision had been made. "We'll be back," he said softly. Then he lifted his voice again. "Thanks for cooperating, Marcus. Good choice." They walked away, carrying the bag like it was a trophy. I watched until they were halfway down the street. Then I closed my door and locked it with hands that didn't quite feel like mine. At 7 p.m., Aaron texted. "What happened?" I texted back. "Stay inside, don't engage them. We'll talk later." That night, I moved into the secret room and stayed there. Not because I wanted to hide forever, but because I needed to break the pattern. If they came back and found my house dark and silent, it might confuse them. If they watched for routines, I was about to stop providing any. At 2:30 a.m., I heard a vehicle. Not a normal car. A truck, slow, heavy. I killed my lights and listened. The sound stopped near my driveway. Doors opened. Voices. Then the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged. My throat tightened. Were they bringing a tool to force entry? A bar? A jack? A saw? I stayed absolutely still. I heard footsteps around the garage again. The side door handle rattled. Once, twice. Then a new sound, a faint, high-pitched whine. Not loud, but distinct. A battery-powered cutting tool. My hands went cold. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were working. The tool whine stopped. A thump. Another thump. Then quiet voices. Frustration. "Metal plate," someone muttered. "He reinforced it?" Good. My old reinforcement work was buying me minutes. But minutes are not safety. Minutes are only time to make decisions. I didn't have a dramatic escape tunnel. I didn't have a hidden trapdoor out to the woods. I had one entrance and one chance to keep it unknown. So I did the only thing that made sense. I became smaller than my fear. I stayed in the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loud. I let the world above me be loud without me joining it. After about 20 minutes, the noises shifted. Footsteps moved away from the side door. The whine returned, briefly, but farther. Then I heard them on the garage floor. They were inside. My stomach turned hard. They had breached the garage door, likely at the bottom corner where the panel can be forced, then lifted enough to slip in. It wasn't a perfect barrier. Nothing is perfect. I listened as they moved around above me, their footsteps heavy, their voices low. One of them kicked something. "This place is a dump." Another said, "He's got to have stuff. Batteries, food, something." They started rummaging. Tools clanked. Cabinets opened. Boxes shifted. I'd staged my garage to look messy, but mess doesn't stop hands. It just slows eyes. Then the confident voice spoke again, right above me. "Spread out," he said. "Look for anything that feels off. New boards, fresh screws, anything." My mouth went dry. He was looking for seams. I pressed myself against the chamber wall, trying to become part of the dirt. Above me, footsteps moved closer to the tool chest. A drawer opened, closed. Another opened. Then a pause. A long pause. I imagined him standing over the rubber mats, noticing a subtle difference, a slightly different pattern, a faint cut line, something. Then the voice said, "This is going nowhere." Another voice asked, "You sure? He's here. He has to be." The confident one sounded annoyed. "He's not here. Or he's not in the house. The house is too clean. He would have left signs." I almost laughed at that. My house wasn't clean. I'd just made it look normal. They kept searching for another 10 minutes. I heard a cabinet fall. Someone swore softly. Then, finally, the footsteps moved away. A garage door creaked. The truck started again. The sound faded. I waited another 30 minutes, because relief can get you hurt. When I finally climbed up into the garage at 4:05 a.m., I moved like I was walking through a museum after hours. Everything was shifted. Not destroyed, but disturbed. Cabinets open, a pile of bags moved, a box overturned. And near the tool chest, one of the rubber mats was slightly out of place. They'd been close. I fixed the mat seam carefully, aligning it exactly. Then I walked into the house and locked every lock again, even though they'd already proven locks were negotiable. At 9:30 a.m., Erin knocked, eyes wide. I let her in quickly. "They broke into your garage," she said. "Yes," I said. Erin's mouth tightened. "What do we do now?" I looked at her for a long moment and realized something. My secret room was still secret, but my life above it was no longer sustainable. The group would come back. They'd escalate. They'd bring more people. And each visit increased the odds they noticed something small. The best hiding place in the world fails when you have to defend it over and over. "We changed the story," I said. Erin blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "we make them believe there's nothing left to take." That day, I staged a controlled loss. I moved a portion of my visible supplies into obvious places in the garage, then I lost them. I left the garage door slightly open at night, just enough to look like someone had been careless after a struggle. I scattered empty cans and torn packaging in a way that suggested I'd already been hit hard. I made it look like someone else had beaten them to me. It felt wrong because it was deception. But survival is often a choice between bad options. The next time they came, 3 days later, they looked at my garage, looked at the scattered emptiness, and their posture changed. Disappointment is a powerful deterrent. The confident one stood in my driveway and called out again, but his voice had less certainty. "Marcus!" he shouted. "You still in there?" I didn't answer. They checked the garage, found the staged mess, and I heard the younger guy say, "Told you, nothing here." They left faster that time. After that, the pressure eased. Not because the world got kinder, but because predators prefer easy meals. Weeks passed. The infected never went away, but their movement patterns shifted with weather and with the simple fact that cities ran out of noise. When the streets got quiet, the infected spread, wandering, drawn to whatever sound remained. A dropped pan, a barking dog, a car alarm triggered by a dying battery. People, meanwhile, became the more complicated problem. Some formed small, quiet cooperative groups. Others formed roaming crews with rules and demands. Some people simply vanished. Through Aaron, I learned that Luis was still alive but exhausted. He sent one radio message that Aaron relayed to me. The city's response systems were fractured, working in pockets, not as a whole. There was no clean rescue coming. So I adapted. I used my secret room as a safety layer, not a coffin. I went above ground during safe windows, did quiet maintenance, and returned underground when the neighborhood became active in the wrong way. I rotated my air filters. I monitored humidity to prevent mold. I kept my battery charging steady and modest, so nothing heated up too much. And I started building something else. Trust, but controlled. Erin became my only regular connection. She respected limits. She didn't gossip after the close call with her sister. She learned quickly that privacy is not selfish when the world is hungry. In exchange, I helped her reinforce her home without turning it into a billboard. I taught her how to listen for changes in sound, how to keep light discipline at night, how to pack a move bag that isn't heavy but covers basics: water, high-calorie food, a flashlight with tape over the lens to reduce glare, spare batteries, a first aid kit, and simple tools. I didn't teach her how to fight. I taught her how to avoid needing to. One afternoon in early spring, when the air finally smelled like wet earth instead of smoke, Erin came over at 3:15 p.m. with a folded piece of paper. "It's a note," she said. "From who?" "Someone left it on my porch," she said. "No knock, just there." I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, almost formal. "We are relocating families north. We have a secure site. We can take medical personnel. Bring only what you can carry. Meet at the old Meyer parking lot on Maxtown Road tomorrow at 6 a.m. Erin looked at me, eyes searching. "Is this real?" I stared at the note. Meyer on Maxtown Road was real. The time was specific. The offer targeted her job. That made it feel more credible, but credibility is not safety. "What do you think?" she asked. I breathed out slowly. It could be real. It could also be a trap. Erin's jaw tightened. "So I do nothing?" I thought about my secret room, about how it had kept me alive, but also about how staying in one place forever is its own trap. Food runs out. Batteries fail. People's curiosity returns. "We can observe," I said. "Not join, not commit, just watch from a distance." Erin nodded. "Okay." The next morning, I left my house at 5:20 a.m. for the first time in weeks with a real purpose. I moved quietly, wearing neutral clothing, carrying a small pack with water, binoculars, and a handheld radio. No bright gear. No loud anything. I approached the Maxtown Road area by back streets and tree lines, staying off main roads. From behind a line of trees near the edge of the lot, I watched. At 5:55 a.m., a small group of people appeared. Not many, about 9, 2 pickup trucks, 1 minivan, a couple of people with backpacks. No obvious weapons displayed, but you could see the posture of people who had learned caution. At 6:10 a.m., another vehicle arrived. A white box truck with no markings. It parked at the far end of the lot. 2 people got out. They didn't rush anyone. They spoke calmly, gesturing, showing something like a clipboard. Families approached in small steps. It looked, from a distance, like organization, not a raid. But then something happened that tightened my chest. A drone rose from behind the box truck, climbing fast. Not a huge one, but enough to carry a camera. It hovered above the lot and then slowly pivoted, scanning. Aaron, beside me, whispered, "That's not good." "No," I whispered back. "A drone isn't automatically evil, but a drone is control. A drone is surveillance. A drone means whoever is running this wants information and coverage." I watched as the families loaded into vehicles. The box truck didn't take anyone. It just observed. Then the drone moved toward the tree line. Toward us. "Back," I hissed. We retreated slowly, staying low. The drone hovered, searching, then drifted away. Aaron's breathing was fast. They saw us. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." We moved farther back, took a longer route home, and didn't speak until we were behind our own fences again. At 9:40 a.m., Aaron sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of water like it was an anchor. "So, what now?" she asked. I looked at her and realized the real story wasn't the secret room anymore. The room was a tool. The real story was what happens when you've survived long enough to choose between hiding and rebuilding. "We keep our options," I said. "We don't join groups we don't understand, but we also don't stay frozen. If a real safe site exists, we verify it on our terms." Aaron nodded, but her eyes were tired. "I can't do this forever." "I know," I said. That night, I went underground and listened to the radio again. The emergency broadcast had degraded into fragments. Some local voices on ham radio bands were coordinating small aid exchanges, using code words and meeting points, trying to avoid the kind of control I'd seen in my driveway. I found one voice that sounded steady, older, patient. A man named George, according to his call sign, who talked like a retired engineer. He described a quiet cooperative out near Delaware State Park, north of the city, where people were sharing water filtration and medical supplies without demanding control. He didn't ask for names. He didn't ask for addresses. He asked for caution and verification. That sounded like the kind of group I could approach without becoming someone's resource list. Over the next week, Aaron and I prepared a trial contact. Not a dramatic move, a test. We packed small trade items, sealed medical supplies Aaron could spare, a water filter element, batteries, and a written note with no personal details. We chose a meeting point George mentioned, a spot near the park where a certain trail sign had been marked with a small blue stripe. On a gray morning at 7:10 a.m., we went. The world outside the neighborhood felt emptier and more dangerous. Roads had abandoned cars. Some had been pushed aside. Trees had fallen, and nobody had cleared them. It wasn't chaos everywhere. It was neglect. The slow erosion of maintenance that holds modern life together. We parked far away and approached on foot. At the trail sign, we found the blue stripe. It was small, subtle, the kind of mark you'd miss if you weren't looking. Beneath the sign, tucked into a weathered plastic container, was a note. "Leave items. Step back." Wait. We did. We placed our trade items, stepped back 50 yards, and waited behind trees. After 10 minutes, 2 people emerged from the woods, a man and a woman. Both moved carefully, not aggressive but alert. The man carried a small handheld radio. The woman carried a simple pack. They approached the container, checked it, looked around, then took the items and replaced them with something else. A sealed bag of dried food, a handwritten map with a single route highlighted, and a note. We can talk. One person only. Tomorrow. Same time, same place. Aaron looked at me, eyes wide. I stared at the note, then at the woods where the two had disappeared. One person only. That made sense. That felt like a group that understood risk. I'll go, I said. Aaron's mouth opened, then closed. Marcus. I built my life around not being seen, I said softly. But hiding is not a future. It's a pause. The next day, I went alone. At 7:05 a.m., I stood near that trail sign with my hands visible. No sudden movements, and waited. A different person approached this time. A man in his 50s with a calm face and a deliberate gait. He didn't smile like a salesman. He nodded like a person acknowledging another person. Marcus? He asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. My name was already a rumor. Holding it back now didn't protect me. I'm George, he said. We didn't shake hands. That was the new normal. George spoke plainly. He said they had a small cooperative site with about 20 people, including a few with practical skills, a former water treatment operator, a mechanic, a teacher, a paramedic. They were not a militia. They didn't patrol neighborhoods demanding supplies. They stayed quiet, managed resources, and traded carefully. We don't do forced contributions, George said. We do agreed shares, and if someone wants to leave, they leave. What about the drones? I asked. George's eyes narrowed. We've seen them. We avoid them. And the groups that take? I asked. George's jaw tightened. We don't engage unless we must. We move if the pressure builds. He studied me for a moment. You have a shelter. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. I didn't confirm or deny, I just said, I have a safety layer. George nodded like that was enough. Here's the truth, he said. No place is invisible forever. The longer this goes, the more the people who take will learn. They'll get better at spotting patterns, better at tracking, better at squeezing. I felt a familiar coldness in my chest. So, what's your answer? George pointed to the woods. We stay flexible. We stay quiet. And we keep enough trust to build something that can move. A moving community is harder to control. A silent community is harder to find. A community that doesn't hoard attention survives longer. When I returned home, I didn't immediately decide to leave. My secret room had done its job. It had kept me alive through the most dangerous phase when everyone was loud and desperate. But now, the danger was changing shape. Now it was about endurance. That night, at 10:30 p.m., I sat underground and listened to the fans hum softly. I watched the carbon dioxide number on the monitor. I checked the battery voltage. I ran my hand over the wall framing, feeling for moisture, for changes. Everything was stable. And yet, stability didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like waiting in a safe place while the world outside reorganized into new threats. In the morning, I called Erin over and told her the truth, as much as I could without turning it into a map. I have a room, I said, under the garage. It's quiet. It's designed to avoid attention. Erin's face went still. Not shocked, just processing. You've been living under your garage, she said. Not living, I said. Using it. Erin swallowed. Why are you telling me now? Because I met someone, I said. A cooperative group. Quiet, realistic. They're north. They're careful. It might be a future. Erin's eyes filled slightly. Not with tears exactly, but with the weight of being tired for too long. "And you think I should go," she said. "I think you should have the option," I said. "And I think if we go smart. We don't announce it. We don't become a parade." Aaron nodded slowly. "What about Mallory?" I paused. "Does she want to come?" Aaron looked down. "She's scared, but she's learning." That afternoon, we made a plan. Not a dramatic caravan plan, a practical one. We would move in stages, we would cache supplies, not carry everything at once. We would leave the house looking occupied for as long as possible. We would not burn things, not make smoke, not give anyone a reason to come looking. The secret room became our staging point, a place to rest between moves, a place to hide if someone watched us leave, a place to store sealed supplies until the last possible moment. On the first night of preparation, at 1:10 a.m., I heard footsteps again outside. I went still underground, listening, but this time the footsteps didn't linger. They passed by, moving towards someone else's house. It hit me then. The room wasn't just hiding me. It was hiding my choices. It was letting me wait until the moment was right. 2 days later, at 5:45 a.m., Aaron and Mallory came into my garage quietly, carrying small packs. No rolling suitcases, no loud zippers, no bright headlamps. Mallory looked different than the first time I'd seen her. Her eyes were more focused. Her movements were careful. "I'm sorry," she said quietly the moment she stepped inside. "For talking. For being loud." I nodded once. "Just be quiet now. That's what matters." We didn't leave in daylight. We didn't leave like people fleeing. We left like people going for a morning walk. We moved through backyards, along fence lines, staying off the street until we reached a point where the neighborhood thinned and the tree cover increased. Then we cut toward a parked vehicle I'd staged days earlier in a spot that didn't connect to my house directly. It was an old work van, nothing special, slightly dirty on purpose. I'd kept it fueled quietly over time, not full, just enough. A full fuel tank is comfort. Comfort makes you sloppy. As we drove north, we avoided main roads. We used county routes, then smaller roads. We stopped once, briefly, behind a line of trees just to listen. Listening became part of travel, like checking mirrors. We encountered 2 infected on a rural road near a ditch. They wandered slowly, drawn by nothing. We didn't approach. We didn't make noise. We drove around at a walking pace and kept going. That was the new rule. Avoidance first, always. By 9:30 a.m., we reached the general area George had indicated. No big sign, no obvious camp. Just a sequence of subtle markers that made sense only if you were told what to look for. A blue stripe on a tree, a stacked rock pattern near a trail, a piece of reflective tape placed low, not high. When we finally reached the site, it wasn't a fortress. It was a cluster of simple structures tucked into trees near a service road, with sight lines controlled and movement minimized. People emerged slowly, watching, not rushing. George stepped forward. He saw me, then Aaron and Mallory. "You brought 2, he said evenly. I kept my voice calm. "One is medical, one is learning. We're not here to take, we're here to contribute." George studied Aaron. "What kind of medical?" Aaron lifted her chin. "Nurse, surgery center. I can handle wound care, infection control, basic triage." George nodded. Then he looked at Mallory. "And you?" Mallory swallowed. I can do logistics. I can track inventory. I can organize supplies without making it obvious." George's eyes softened slightly. "Good." He stepped aside. Then welcome, quietly. As we walked in, I felt something I hadn't felt since the beginning. Not safety, exactly, but structure, a plan beyond tomorrow morning. That night, when I lay on a simple cot inside a low-lit shelter that smelled like pine and clean water instead of fear, I thought about the room under my garage. I thought about the hours I'd spent digging in silence, the bags of soil hidden in bins, the careful vent path, the way I'd tried to make myself invisible. That room had never been the end goal. It was the bridge. It carried me from the loud, panicked beginning to the quieter, harder middle, where the real work wasn't just staying alive. It was staying human while being careful. And if someone someday walked into my old garage and looked around and wondered why the floor mats were placed the way they were, why the tool chest sat exactly there, why nothing seemed quite worth stealing, they would never know what had been underneath their feet. They would never hear the fans, or see the dim light, or understand how close the world came to taking everything. They would just see a messy garage in a messy neighborhood and move on. And that was the point. Because the best secret room isn't the one nobody can find.